Hi everyone, I'm Joe. Today it's time for me to do my monthly wrap-up for February 2023. Somehow we are already 2 months into the year. February was a really good reading month in total, improved upon January, and hopefully I'm fairly confident that March will improve upon that, because I read 6 books in total by 6 different authors, or one of them was an editor with multiple authors technically, in 3 different genres. And without any delay, I'll get straight into the first book, which was Station Eternity by Lafferty. This is the second book that I've read by Lafferty now. The first, frankly, I'm not going to mince words, I enjoyed more than this one. I have to admit that. This is the first book in a new series by her called the Mid-Solar Murders. This is a science fiction sort of murder mystery of sorts. Sort of like the murder mystery part is very light, really. And the setting is interesting. It is about a station called Eternity. There are other alien stations and things, and this is one of them. And this station normally doesn't allow humans. It's been near Earth for a while, and in relatively recent times it's allowed a few humans, specifically 2 or 3, as the main character is now the third, to be on board this station. However, the one character, she is nervous of being on the station, and indeed she's nervous of anybody else, human, being on the station as well, because for some reason murders seem to just happen around her. Everywhere she goes, somebody seems to get murdered, and she ends up getting involved in trying to solve the murder. And yeah, I mean, it works out in the end, but she's, it's not very nice for her to be around people that keep getting killed all the time. And yeah, well, guess what? It happens on this space station. A bunch of other people come to the station, and people get killed. And she starts having to try and solve the murders. There are alien species, there are other humans, and it's an interesting mix of aliens with murder mysteries, or like cosy murder mystery, which is not entirely that cosy, with the strangeness of this space station. The overall mix, I think, works to a certain level, but also creates some of the biggest problems, and I think is one of the reasons why this book fails to work as well, in my opinion, as her previous and first novel, because it just feels a bit jumbled and a little bit messy. Frankly, you think that the book is about, and the focus is about one thing, and then it's kind of not, and you don't get the answers that you want for a murder mystery, but you don't get the science fiction that you'd normally get from a straight out science fiction book without murder mystery elements. So it's sort of like light on both the different elements, and basically it doesn't feel as if it's like fixed together. You can feel like melded into one seamless experience. It feels like it's written into several sections and doesn't quite flow as well as it could, which is a shame. But I'm happy that I read this, and I do think it's worth reading. Just be aware that of those little flaws, in my opinion, and you'll be okay. Personally, the second book that I read in February was a novella, in fact not a novel, I believe, and that is To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. At this point I've read 5 books by her before, maybe 4, I'm not entirely sure, and this is a good one. Personally, I thought the idea of it was interesting, and the execution really, really good as well. This is a very thin novella, as I've just pointed out. It is science fiction, and the idea is simply that it's about a spaceship crew that are flying a very long distance, where they are in basically a form of cryogenic suspension, essentially, sort of like a deep sleep, in between times, because otherwise they would age too much, and they are basically going to these far worlds to explore and see if there are any signs of life, and sort of a mission of curiosity, which is obviously part of the human sort of spirit and part of our nature inherently. And it does something a little different though. Rather than using either technology, like big spacesuits and such to walk around with on these planets, where obviously they're going to be on the planets for quite a long time, or rather than trying to partially terraform the planets, which is an aspect of science fiction that has been talked about a lot, this does something a little different. It focuses on the idea of what is called thermoforming, changing yourself to match your environment on another planet. So when they are in this cryogenic suspension, and they're essentially getting a certain cocktail of essentially sort of treatments and drugs, that sort of thing, to alter them in some significant way. Like the one planet has got higher gravity than normal, so they essentially, whilst they're essentially asleep, they are increased in body mass and muscle mass. So when they wake up, they suddenly find that they look as though they've been at the gym for years and they're like super amazing shape, really quite way stronger than they've ever been in the rest of their lives. And that's to cope with the gravity and the sheer amount of added weight that they have to carry, basically, because obviously the gravity makes everything feel essentially heavier. And this happens on several other planets, and it's just an exploration of them with they're going through different changes on the different planets. And I'm not going to say too much more about what the other changes are other than that one, because it's not a long novella. And I will say though that it's really well written, great ideas. I really like the writing style. The characters actually work together well and bounce off each other well and create something I thought was really strong. And I was really quite interested in this one. I thought the idea of changing yourself rather than changing the planet just for exploration was an interesting one. And one that I have seen and read, I should say, books that feature changing yourself, thermoforming, but not often and not in this way. So this was a interesting change and one that I really appreciate. The third book that I read in February was The Midwich Cuckoos, written by John Wyndham. This is the oldest book that I read in this month. All the other books were published within the last 3 years. This was published in 1957, I believe, and it ages rather well, I think, because I was actually really impressed by this. Sometimes older science fiction books can show their age, often in the form of being, frankly, quite sexist with their views towards female characters and male characters. This doesn't. I mean, it focuses on the female characters for obvious reasons I'll get into in a minute, but it does it well. And overall, I was actually impressed by this and I was glad I read it. The idea of this, I mean, it's a classic, is that there's a small English town. One day, everybody in the town gets put to sleep, essentially. Nobody's really sure why. When the local people, bakers and delivery services try to deliver something, they walk past a certain point and they just instantly just fall unconscious and go to sleep on the floor in the middle of the road. And the military get involved, of course, go there. They figure out that there's something in the centre, some kind of silver object right in the centre of the village that's obviously projecting some kind of sleep field or something. Nobody really knows what's happening. And then all of a sudden, a day later, everybody in the village starts waking up and they can get in and obviously help them. Some people have died due to cold and such, and some people did have accidents and that sort of thing, which obviously couldn't get attended because they were asleep, so there's a few deaths, and everything seems normal for a while. Then suddenly something a bit strange happens. They find out essentially that every woman of childbearing age in the village is pregnant, which is a bit unusual, obviously. All the single women that do not want children anymore in marriages, and there's one woman that is not in a happy marriage, and she literally has been trying to avoid her husband for a long time, and she's pregnant as well. And all the combination characters, obviously this is not normal. They haven't obviously just being unfaithful to their husbands, or if they're single, they haven't just been with somebody to get pregnant. Obviously, this is, you know, the object in the village made them pregnant blatantly. I mean, that's not a spoiler. I mean, it basically tells you that on the back of the book, frankly, so that's not a spoiler. And this is about what happens when all these women get pregnant and they have children, and the children are, you know, are they normal or are they not? I mean, they've all got blonde hair and golden eyes, so that should be an indication that it's not entirely standard, but nobody's entirely sure. And it goes in an interesting way that I didn't expect. The focus to start with is a couple that are about to go into town and they realise something's up, so they back away, and it's told through their point of view for a while, and then after a while they travel away. It changes point of view, and then one of those characters comes back and gets involved again, and it's that point of view again, although just one of them this time. And it's an interesting point of view, interesting concept, it's well written, the characters are developed well, the concept is good, and it's done with some interesting ideas behind it, and it does twist and turn more than I thought it would. I thought it would just be a simple case of, you know, they were basically sort of like alien children or monstrous children or something, or mutants or something, children, and they were going to be, you know, terrible in some way. And it's not quite that. It's actually something rather different in an interesting way, and I would heavily recommend this. It was really quite interesting and really quite novel, and I was very happy that I read this. The fourth book that I read in February was Sinopticon, edited by Xueting C Ni. I apologise if I am pronouncing it incorrectly. I was having difficulty finding a reference to how you pronounce that name. This is a science fiction collection with all Chinese authors, translated by the editor as well, with a foreword by Zhe, who I've read a book by in the fairly recent past, about only a few months ago in fact, and I really like her book. This is an interesting collection of science fiction short stories, one that I'm very happy that I've read, and one that I would really recommend, because the editor and creator of this collection, she is trying to create a collection that represents modern China, and the way that China has, whilst people think of China as this big sort of country that's becoming modern very quickly, it does have a lot of aspects to Chinese culture that is actually playing really heavy catch up to the rest of the Western world, frankly. And it's interesting to see how her view of that, and indeed the authors themselves in their short stories, view different aspects, because these are all ideas, as she says in her little introduction to each story, the editor. These are all ideas that have been done before. They're ideas that are familiar to Western readers, for the most part, in general concept and such. But it's the idea that for China, that is not as familiar to Chinese authors as a whole. I mean, this is very generalised, of course. So they are getting to sort of play with these ideas in ways that are unique to them. And because obviously Chinese culture is different from the Western world, they are using ideas that are familiar to the Western world, but obviously using their own viewpoint, Chinese culture viewpoint, and they're doing things with some of these concepts that, indeed I'm familiar with pretty much all of them, that you don't really expect. There's little twists on certain classic, well, relatively classic ideas that I'm well familiar with, and produce something really quite unique and really quite special and remarkable. And every single short story in this, I'm not going to talk about any one individual story, by the way, because, you know, obviously short stories, I will spoil something almost without question, frankly, if I did. Every short story is written with real enthusiasm for the subject, with true passion for, you can tell the authors enjoyed every moment of the writing process, and it's been translated well, and indeed the editor and translator for this, Xueting C Ni, she has tried to keep the references from the original Chinese authors together as much as she can, rather than changing the references to a sort of westernized version. She's tried to merely change them a little bit just to make it so Western readers would understand these references, and in some cases she's actually used footnotes, which is one that I think is particularly interesting and I think was particularly well done. So the editor of this, normally I don't always mention the editors of short story collections. In this, I think she did an exceptionally good job, and she chose the stories in such a way that you really to work together, and her little views and explanations for why stories are where they are in the collection and such just worked really well. So I'll look out for more, basically by the editor actually, which is unusual. Normally with collections it's the authors that get my attention. With this it's the editor, because she's put together a pretty remarkable collection overall. The fifth and penultimate book that I read in February is The Grief of Stones, written by Katherine Addison. This is the second book in the series The Cemeteries of Amalo, which focuses around a character called Salahar. He is a witness for the dead. Essentially, he can detect the presence of the recently departed and not talk to them, but get a impression of what's gone on with them. So if there's any suspicious deaths, essentially he can investigate and find out what's happened in most cases, and everything from there. Sort of odd deaths can be resolved basically. And this is the second book, as I said. Salahar has sort of slightly more developed into his role within the community, within the town, rather more as the witness for the dead. But he's still an interesting character, and indeed the whole book works because he's still a character that suffers from anxiety, self-confidence, self-doubt, and he's just never sure of himself. I mean, he's sure of his own ability, although that has an interesting twist on it in this book, but everything else he's not sure of. And it's that uncertainty where he always thinks that he's always like doubtful and looks down way more than he should. He sort of defers to people and he's like, oh no, that's not my job, or that's not allowed, because not just because of his job, but because it's him. He thinks fairly negatively about himself quite often, and the other characters around him, his friends that he's come to know, they're like, no, you are better than this. You just doubt yourself all the time, and they try to basically push him up, and they try to really boost him. And it's nice to see that friendship and those relationships form, and indeed continue throughout the book, because he's a character that, same as all of us, we always have friendship that we value, and then we all doubt ourselves from time to time. The character Salah, he doubts himself, and yet in this he's got friends that are like, no, you shouldn't doubt yourself. In this case, you are right, you're a good person that are capable of more, and you are indeed doing more than you think you are. And it's a very personal story to Salahar, and I think a very personal story for the reader, because it makes you, at least it did for me, think of relationships that I've got with people, friends and things, and it makes you think, actually, I shouldn't doubt myself in certain circumstances as much as I should, because I do certain things that Salahar does. I think all of us do at times, and maybe try to push a bit more with certain things, and sort of be more than you are, sort of do a little bit better in certain respects. And it's just a really interesting emotional journey for the main character, and indeed for the reader, and it's remarkably well written, really. Looking forward to the third book, which I believe there is a name for the third book, though I do not know what it is because I'm not particularly interested yet until it's obviously out. But there'll definitely be a third book because it's already got a name somewhere, and I will be very interested to read that when it comes out because this was excellent, and I would really recommend this. Although read the first one, obviously first, because otherwise it'll be a bit odd, let's say. And finally, the last book that I read in February was an ebook, so I'll put a picture up on screen, and that is Mosaics and Magic by Nancy Warren. This is the 14th book in the Vampire Knitting Club series. I read the other 13 entries in this series in 2021, I believe. Maybe the first couple I might have read at the end of 2020. And I originally got into this series because of Rachel, known as Calnadium on BookTube, a friend of mine whom I like to sarcastically thank and blame for making me read lots of books. And she actually reminded me, because she only read this book a matter of weeks ago as well, that this book actually was out. I thought that the series was pretty much ended after the 13th one, but there is actually a 14th now after this one, and I feel as though, again, I'm going to say the same thing, I feel as though the series is complete though, because the 13th ended it in a way that I thought was pretty much complete. They could do a few little things and that's it. They've done those few little things in this 13th book, in this 14th book, so now I don't think there's anything left for them to write about now with the series. I think it would just be writing the mysteries for the point of writing them at this point, which I think it will sort of spoil them if she continues writing more books in this world. Frankly, I mean, there is going to be a spin-off series though as well, so that's, you know, a whole different question. The idea, right, is that there is an American woman. Her grandmother dies in the first book, or so she thinks, and she comes over from America to sort out, you know, the affairs of her grandmother. Specifically, her grandmother owned a small knitting shop in Cardinal Wolsey's, and she finds out, however, a few interesting things, like her grandmother is not dead, she's actually become a vampire, and the vampires in question are actually not the evil people that she thinks, and they actually live in an underground complex below her knitting shop that she now inherited and is now running, and they have a knitting club which she becomes a part of, and indeed she ends up running. And basically every book is that there is a murder or two, and there's other little things, you know, things get stolen and things, and essentially her and the knitting club, they have to solve the murder mystery and, you know, obviously make sure that nobody realises that, you know, there's a bunch of vampires hanging around this knitting shop. This is a cosy murder mystery series. It's light-hearted, it's easy to read, and it's just a really nice gap in between heavier, more intense books. I mean, frankly, after the Katherine Addison book, which was very emotional, very deep, this was just easy to read, light-hearted, and, you know, kind of fluffy, I suppose you could say. And, yeah, there's very light romance elements in it, but it's really very light indeed. It just works. It's just an easy read, and one that, you know, if that sounds like something you could do in between other books, which is frankly what I've always used them for, then I would recommend these because they are very handy for that. Anyway, with that said, that is actually it for all of the books that I read in February. So if you have read any of these, or you would like to, then please leave a comment and we can have a talk about it. If you want to know any more about any of these books, then again, you know, just say so and I'll answer to the best of my ability. Of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll know these things because, you know, I am only a normal, you know, bookworm after all. All my social media links, along with the links to these books and a link to Rachel's channel, can be found in the description box below. And with that, that is it for this video. I will see you another day. Bye everyone.